Right, so we've been discussing issues coronavirus. We're going to switch gears now and then come back and completely localize things. We will talk in depth now about what we've seen play out during the fight against corruption, and certain steps that it might be have been perceived that steps have been taken in a backward direction when it comes to the fight against corruption. And that's what we're going to go into now right here in the Situation Room. This is Kenya's biggest conversation, and if you're just joining us, we're now looking at, what has been called the clash of the giants, and we saw that when we started off this morning. Tensions between the DPP, Nurdin Haji, and DCI boss George Kinoti. The boil over in court after the prosecutor disowns charges drafted by investigators against the KPA boss, prompting the magistrate for free suspect. Now, this is one case, but if you want to look at the general way in which things are done in the fight against corruption, and it seems, we've had conversation after conversation about what should be done, what seems to be the problem, where is it that we see there being a bottleneck, why is it that justice then cannot be expensed, why then does it take so long, are there gains that have been made, and if these gains have been made, why are they not being communicated adequately? Interestingly enough, Kenyans still baying for blood. They want the big fish to be caught, and not just caught, but then be convicted and then sent to jail. But this doesn't seem to happen. The fight against corruption has made some good, made some good mileage over time. Over the last 18 months, we've seen that quite a lot has been done, if you actually have to go and dig out and see. But here we are seeing where two offices or two agencies, essentially, that being the office of the DPP and the office of the DCI, should be working together to make sure that this fight actually moves through the prosecution system, through the courts, and getting something done. And then we see a clash like this, whereby one says, we've done our due diligence, we've done what needed to be done, and we've presented this case before court. The DPP says that is all well and good. However, we also need to look into this, and we need to do our part. And then we will then agree or disagree. But in the meantime, the people that have been charged in this case then will be allowed to go for now until we're able to bring a case solid enough that can now stand the test of time through the courts. To many already being seen as, all right, there's a clash. And this mileage that we have gained over time then will be watered down. And it means that the fight against corruption has taken a major setback in all of this. Is this the case? Is this what's happening? And how long then will it be seen to be the case? Is the fight against corruption, has it taken a blow by all of this? By a lot of what people would see? Yes, it has, because of the fact that these two agencies who should be working together seem to be clashing over something that should be quite easy to see.
We're discussing, in essence, the difference between what we perceive justice to be and what it actually is. What would, in the mind of a day-to-day Mwananchi Kenyan, believe to be justice?
Somebody's arrested, they're taken to court, they're convicted, they go to jail.
Actually arrested and go to jail directly.
The court system, if we could do away with that.
Then they're reminded you have to go to court
system. Okay. So this might take a little bit longer, all right.
Yes, and when you go to court, there are court processes. And the details of court processes relies on one thing. You may accuse someone and you may even have evidence, but then you have to prove that evidence is true. Simple. Therein lies the conundrum, because it is always not that easy. You may even know something, but you cannot prove it. And then remember, we in the media seem to have determined to present a certain picture of the DCI, DPP, and the judiciary constantly being on loggerheads. But we also forget that in the same media, there are reports of, say, the judiciary having issues of their own. For instance, the judicial officers, page 12 of the Standard. Officers accuse JSC of injustice in promotions. And in the picture is the Chief Registrar of the Judiciary, Anamadi. It tells you that we actually do have a fairly robust system, much as we criticize it, that A, brings out issues and even makes some credible attempt at tackling these issues. Now, the question that you ask, do I think the DCCI or the office of the DCCI is doing what they should do? I'd say Yes, resoundingly so, yes. Do I think the DPP is doing what? The answer again would be yes. Do I think the judiciary is doing its job? Again, I would say yes. And then I'd say now, having said yes, let us ask, what is it that happens in these three departments of government that give them the bad name that seems to be doing the rounds?
But this is what is doing the rounds actually in this case. There seems to be some finger pointing. Now, understandably, there are these two faces, whether it is George Kinoti and Nuruddin Haji, who are the face of these two offices. But they have officers who work under them, who are investigators, who are officers in whatever sector under these offices, under their auspices. The problem that we are being faced with right now is that there are a number of cases that the DCI investigates, right? By law, they are mandated then to take these files to the office of the DPP. The problem now that is being called a setback, which people are being asked to look at with a bit of scrutiny, is that there are delays at the DPP where these files have been taken.
There are claims that there are delays
at the DPP where these files have been taken, and they are taking too much time before they are now taken to court. This is what is being seen as the setback, and not just one case, CT. They're looking at a number from the KRA case that was brought to them. This was said to have been taken directly to the courts, bypassing the DPP. So it seems that there's some kind of autonomy and authority that the DPP is trying to continually remind the DCI about in terms of how the law is supposed to be followed. You have a case, you do your due diligence, bring it to us, and we'll take it from there. Whereas the DCI is saying, look, this is a hook, line, and sinker. We should be able to land this plane very quickly. But then it goes to the DPP, and then things seem to stall.
Yeah, but
this is what could be seen as why a lot of the big fish, or even in some cases the small fish, then are not being justice is not being dispensed.
Is it not the same complaint that the DPP's office seem to have against the judiciary?
Against the judiciary. And this is the thing, then we're then passing on responsibility. By the time it gets to the DPP and the DPP talks about, all right, we're ready to go, then the judiciary steps in, and it becomes now one whole circus of something is not happening at the point in which it should happen, Let's look at the weather, and we'll come back and discuss this a little bit further. Looking at what is happening in the fight against corruption. Are we at a setback? Is there something that needs to be done about it? We'll talk about it a little bit more when we come out of this break. Njoko in the studio with CT Muga this morning. As we look at it, CT, it seems to be a locking of heads, a locking of horns rather, in the case of what needs to be done or what is not done. And if we say that I'm presenting cases on a regular basis, but nothing is done, and it seems to be that will be the train as we go from the DCI to the DPP then say, here we go with the case, and we take it forward, and the judiciary says, well, we have a backlog, this thing is going to take time. In terms of the expedition of justice, it will not be as quickly as people want it.
Why there has been that insistence that the DPP must look through these things? Why? Because we had many cases that were thrown out before it even went very far. Insufficient evidence. You are asked, here is what you have on your charge sheet. Evidence. We're still working on it. Out. Gone. The media reported very many such cases. But where the misreporting comes in is, you have this disagreement that is out in the public domain, it's out in the open, and suddenly it's a falling out. It's a disagreement. They happen. It doesn't mean people are falling out. In this very studio, we disagree on views. I'm even now disagreeing with you. Are we falling out?
Are we falling out? But this is the thing. The sentiments that are made are not that come through or that are being reported are not made up. It's not fictitious or a figment of our imagination. These are things that people are actually saying, coming out of a senior DCI official. These are cases touching on people and their rights and need urgent action.
Fine.
They need urgent action.
Yes.
It is not being done. And
it's a disagreement.
They take fault with the DPP. And
it's a disagreement.
Historically, it is not just today on this particular case. They've said this has been the trend. This is what we see. By the time we get something or a file coming out of the office of the DPP, it takes forever. It is not taking the time with which we are investigating and bringing these cases to. We had the head of the EACC here the other day telling us how many cases? 3,000 and something is what they're dealing with, what they've brought out.
Whereas developed countries deal with 20
in a year.
So,
right? So because of the fact that we should be able to put these through, they choose the cases that they're going to work on to avoid things like this. By the time I do something and present it on your desk, right? And then I'm waiting for you to then now move it forward. It takes time. It would have it would have a frustrating effect on those who are carrying out these initial criminal investigations.
that's the job that they're supposed to do. That's
right,
the job
but the job is supposed to be seen end to end. So you can imagine if you get stuck somewhere in the middle, there's an element of frustration that's going to come through, which you would see clearly as having a hampering effect on this fight against corruption. Absolutely.
No.
On the war against corruption, absolutely.
If no do that is not true.
Yes, it's true.
If all the cases that the DCI had taken to the DPP had not moved forward, then it would be true. But we have cases, they say, since April last year. Is it all the cases? No. So there are cases that have gone through. Until and unless we know that a very large number of cases that are taken to the DPP don't move forward, then it is not true.
It's taken attention because top government officials have planned a meeting between Kinoti and Haji to take place sometime next week. So it's a little bit more than just the ruffling of feathers here. It's something that clearly needs attention because they're saying this thing that we've prescribed nationally and even talked about internationally, we have the government, or rather we have the president himself talking to, development partners just a couple of days ago saying the fight against corruption is going along very smoothly. We've made fantastic gains. And here we are with two prime offices that are actually vehicles for this fight, having to have
was that a false statement that we heard?
Of course it wasn't a false statement. But in this case, here we have these two offices prime agencies in getting this fight moving and keeping it moving are saying that they're not able to move at a pace that is acceptable until somebody has to call them to sit down and say, all right, guys, what do we
acceptable
have?
To
and
whom?
How are we going to be able to deal with
acceptable to whom?
Top government officials.
We have a problem, and this is a problem in this country where there is the assumption that things must work in a way that someone perceives
a source within the DCI. If the issues are not addressed, we will lose the plot. We will lose everything. I know they will agree after the planned meeting. So you say that at loggerheads, there's been a fallout since December is when we started seeing these things start popping up. It needs to be agreed. If something is being agreed on, that means there is a point at which there is a disagreement. Or there is a point at which we have not come to consensus.
High-profile cases. Because are you telling me people have not been jailed since April? They have. Are you telling me that all these cases have not involved the DCI at some point? They have. Are you telling me some of these cases did not go to the DPP? They did. So
by the time
we had this very week and last week in the papers, there was this debate about the Media Council and the Guild, the Editors Guild, and there was a complaint that the headlines that we have can be misleading. There was that disagreement. One group felt this, the other group felt that. Okay? Now, if we're talking about the space that has been opened up by the media, we would say the media has truly opened the space. But what was the Media Council doing? In my opinion, they're calling them out and saying, some of these headlines you have are a bit racy. They tend to be more sensational than they are.
They should be.
Yes, okay? So, and they were being told, look, folks, let's rein it in a little bit. But the Editors Guild had their response. If there have been problems that are simmering, we actually don't know what they are. Because...
Don't know, right.
No, we don't know. There is what we are told or what people suggest is the problem. But as it's presented, it is not the problem between Haji and Kinoti.
No. I think it's a problem between their offices, and I think we can accept the fact.
And
that
those issues
there's no
may
smoke
even
without
be
fire.
Beyond them.
Yes, and there's no smoke without fire. By the time it came to December, and then these things started poking through the surface, we don't know how long it had been that they were discussing these things.
And also,
so by the virtue of the fact that it has come to the fore,
and not bring in the judiciary, and that's why I said, have people not been jailed? They have. Have people not been let go? They have. That's the judiciary working, for heaven's sake. I am aware that we are overwhelmed with more scandals than the brain can contain at any moment in time. But let's not lose this major plot. Some of these things we say are not working actually work. It's just that the expectation exceeds the reality. There are only certain things that can be done. There are things that, honestly, with the situation that we have currently, cannot be done. So let's move away from the judiciary, DPP. Let's go to the executive and ask, what is it, apart from having set this thing in motion, and we seem to be moving, what is causing the roadblocks? What is causing the hindrances? This is Kenya. If it's a high-end case, high-profile case, usually it means it involves big shots and it involves a lot of money. What that immediately translates to, there will be attempts to influence that process in favor of those who've been accused. So, what are we dealing with? Because we know that corruption, as we call it, or even grand corruption, fights back. And these people who are in the judiciary, these people who are in the DPP's office, these people who are in the DCI's office are just Kenyans like all other Kenyans. And they have relatives, and they want the things other Kenyans want, and they're also susceptible to the sort of influences that other Kenyans are susceptible to.
At the risk of at the risk of putting words in your mouth, I almost hear you saying that, you know what, this really isn't about process. This really isn't about there being a backlog or capacity or money. It's that because we see the small cases having been sorted out.
Speedy.
Right? Very quickly.
Speed.
It is the big cases where huge amounts of money are involved and somebody wants a piece of the pie, so they're not really interested in being expedient
Partly
about
that,
this. Is this what you're saying?
Partly that I'm saying, but also remember, if you're talking about a high-profile case, you're talking about someone who has influence. And someone who has influence can speak to someone who can speak to someone who can speak to someone. So, these are the realities of the cases that we have. But if you're asking the question that, are we seeing progress? I'm saying yes. Because remember, we come from a background where big fish were never even arrested.
Oh, it never even came up for mention.
Yes, you'd say the thing that would happen, they might get transferred. Okay? And now we hear corruption cases are costly. Why? They involve big lawyers who charge big money. And they are able to delay, not using anything nefarious, just the court processes. Now, where the judiciary is blamed, why don't you put a halt to it, number one, and say, I want this thing done by this time? Because you can, within the law. Why is it that we haven't set up special cases? You can set up special courts and say, these courts will deal with this. It can be done. They'll tell us they don't have the funds. And I'll say, then let's take the issue up with the executive yet again.
So there's a deliberate effort to make sure that these cases actually don't see the light of day. Because if there was
a strong inclination in that direction. If
there was a desire to make sure, if there was will to make sure that these cases go through the prosecutorial process and make sure that all evidence is collected, the case goes through court in record time, it could actually be done.
We have a judicial system that's independent, and yet the funds are controlled by the treasury, and it's doled out as though they're giving out peanuts. How exactly do you expect that judicial system to work?
Let's answer that question when we come back after taking a look at the roads. This is Kenya's biggest conversation, the Situation Room. We'll be back in a bit. And we're looking at issues having to do with corruption. The fight against corruption been lauded over time, having, especially in the last 18 to 24 months, saying that, we've done some good work. Good strides have been made. And I don't think that these reports that we see coming out is something that can just be glossed over. It is something that has been there. It's been a problem that people have been dealing with in terms of how long it takes for some of these things to be done. But yes, the application of will is something that's very important where this is concerned. And if we don't see that, it's just not going to happen. And so the sentiment that people would raise at some point where they say, okay, yeah, another big fish having been caught. Oh, what does that mean? It means that after some time, the case is going to fizzle out and it's not going to be there anymore. And so I hear you saying, CT, that, it's clear that without the political will, at a treasury where it's doling out peanuts, where it should actually be handing out a lot more, so that something can be done, or at least to be seen to be done, and it's not happening at that point. That's where the problem is. So all these little rumblings that we see, these little fires that are being spat out by the meeting that we'll see happen next week between the DCI and the office of the DPP, is just rumblings. The real problem is much further up the line.
It is. If you look at even the ruling, remember there was an earlier case where Manduku was released on a bail. Okay, this was by Justice Eric Ogola. If you look at the number of times this particular MD has actually been accused, he isn't the only one. There are others who are accused of misdeeds and mishandling, and they had a long stay in our facilities, in our penal facilities. Okay. The best this guy has done is spend a night. This was just recently. Now, there's a point I'm getting at here. There are legal processes that must be followed. And this man is innocent until it is proven guilty. Proven. He's been accused. They say they have evidence. That's why you go to a judge or a magistrate to try and determine whether these things are actually true or not. But just because people feel that he is guilty doesn't mean he should be jailed. Just because we think and feel he is guilty. Because this is not just about Manduku. It is about other state corporation heads who have been accused of even huger sums and of bigger crimes. It's about ministers. It's about permanent secretaries. It's about principal permanent secretaries. It's about ministers. So these are cases that have been ongoing, and it's against this backdrop that people have this expectation or the feeling that nothing ever seems to get done.
And
Because
also fueled by the fact that we've seen the smaller cases then be dealt with some speed and alacrity, that someone say, oh, okay, this can actually work. This can actually work. So why
Yes.
can't you translate the same to these big hits, to
it
these bigger
would
cases?
work. It would work if you saw a case being speeded up and some big fish ending in jail. Then people would feel, aha, it actually works. This shoe fits all.
Then it seems these agencies don't get it.
They do get it.
So why then are we not seeing this
Because
happening?
following the legal process, this is the catch-22. If you're going to follow legal processes, they take time. That's the unfortunate thing.
But isn't it
Until
the
you set
conundrum
up-
for people, CT, is that the same legal process is applied when you have these smaller cases. You do.
Yes, but
It's the
the
same.
smaller cases, those are cases will not have these nice, smart lawyers who have a battery of researchers behind them who can actually hold the court ransom for a long time legally.
It's the people who don't matter, Abi, in the smaller
it's
cases.
the people who don't have money. You can matter, but if you don't have money,
You don't
sorry.
matter.
Well, look,
Then
it's
if you
a
don't have-
legal process.
If you don't have money, you don't matter.
If you engage legal minds who know how to work the system, of course you will not have a hard time. We had a case against our CS in charge of the Ministry of Finance and his principal secretary. They are not at their desks. They are not in jail.
They're
but-
free.
They're not free. They're out on a bond. The point I'm making is it's a legal process and it is their right. You may not like it, but it is their right. Now, where the problem arises in a country like ours is we want to see a situation where these rights are applicable across board. Where someone who doesn't have the means or doesn't have a position or influence will also get the same advantages. It's this disparity in advantages that are available within the law that causes this. Because so you feel, so long as I am a nobody, I am going to go to jail. And it is a justifiable position because you do not see people in high office going to jail. The best you can see is them spending time in remand where they usually fall sick. And then when they fall sick, they're taken to hospital. We're told they're taken to hospital. And then they're taken back to court looking as right as rain and looking really chirpy and happy. What am I saying? I am saying that these disagreements that we're having are good. The fact that the media is presenting them is the media doing their duty. It is good. It's in the public domain. We know. If there are arguments, supposed real, imagined or otherwise, between the DCI and the prosecutor, the DPP, good. If the DPP has an issue with the judiciary, good. These debates, this is how you see the exercise of law. This is how you see how legal processes are put into action when they're questioned, when they're tested, when they're put. This is how you see it. Now, we need to understand that this is the reality of following the law. It will not move at the pace you would wish or want it to move. It simply doesn't.
There are other things that are changed or amended in law when it's clear that the process is not taking its proper course.
No, it's not giving you the desired
results. It's not
results.
giving you the desired results. We've seen that legislation has been changed at that level. This argument did not come up yesterday. It has been there over and over again, where the judiciary has been called the bottleneck. In this case, we see that DPP is being called the bottleneck by the DCI and saying that we're not able to move forward regardless of the number of cases that we bring forward. Legislation has been changed in other cases, other matters in the country in order to give the desired results. These desired results we are seeing, and it is clear across board for the people of Kenya, these are the desired results. That people who have been suspected, charges levied against them for alleged crimes that they have committed, then should go through the court process, they be convicted, sent to jail. That across board is the general sentiment coming from Kenyans. That is what people want to see.
They can want all they want.
Now,
believe me, the moment you throw in aspects of the law into it, what they want will probably not see the light of day.
this is what I am saying, that those then involved in the process, there is something that they are gaining by not even making the suggestion that something within the legislation of the laws of the laws of the land could change or could be altered to make sure that we see speed, to make sure that we see some kind of alacrity when it comes to these things, because these things are going to be tied up in the illegal process for years. It could be that some people who are alive now will see their grandchildren before some of these things come to the light of day.
If they don't die before then, that is. Look, it was reported on page 9 of the Standard that MPs were ordered to return 19 million in total paid for UN trip. Each had been budgeted, for each individual they had budgeted 120,000. Good. I am waiting to read a report that they returned the money.
That they actually did return the money.
Yes. By the same token, when we talk about judicial processes, they are what you call civil cases, which are not necessarily criminal. And this was pointed to us clearly by the Director General, the CEO of the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission.
Yes.
Right? We don't hear of asset recovery, or we don't hear of amounts that are actually recovered. And yet, we do know that in reality, we do have a law that provided for amnesty for people to return money that they had abroad into the country. It actually
exists.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there are estimates as to how much of that money was returned. It's in the trillions, I am told. Okay? Now, it isn't advertised. People don't talk about it. But it would be good for the morale of the country if people understood that in this period of time, this is what we have done. We have recovered houses worth this. We have closed bank accounts and recovered monies from them worth this. People feel, aha, work is being done. But we get it in snippets, in bits and pieces. Now, the issue of interference that we're told of, it is true that one can't be advertised because then it goes against the very spirit of what you're trying to do. But there's a lot that is done that we're not told. Now, if it isn't told often enough, despite asking to be told, then we will come to the conclusion that these things, so here's a whitewash, window dressing. These things are not actually done. You can't have the sort of pilferage that amounts to trillions on a yearly basis, because that's what it is really. And then you're telling us it is legal, nothing can be done? No. The economy is crawling on its knees. Surely this calls for the very thing you've been saying, that set up special courts.
Absolutely.
Let's speed up this process.
Let's talk about added, because that's what addendum is, added legislation that allows this thing to go through a lot quicker than it has been happening now. Because we have people not just about people who are complaining. What did the office of the DCI say? We're looking at people's rights, and in terms of their right to have speedy trials, because that's what we're talking about now, isn't it? And
yes,
saying that, it's a right. It is a right of someone to have, and have these issues addressed. Coming out of the office of the DCI, that these cases are touching on people and their rights, and they need urgent action. Because if that becomes the conversation, that people's rights then are not being protected by virtue of the fact that these cases are taking forever, that's another whole kettle of fish that you really don't want to have to deal with. When now you want to throw human rights into all of this and say your right to a fair and speedy trial, of course, another thing that is entrenched in law, how do you play one vis-a-vis the other? These are things that have to be taken into consideration. An amendment to the law, I think at this point, when we continue to look towards solution, is something that needs to happen, because we're going to be talking about this thing year in, year out, and it's going to be years. Well, the legal process takes time, especially when we're talking about a battery of lawyers and a load of information, truckloads of files then that need to be brought in and scrutinized word by word. Counts. I mean, we're talking about a charge sheet that you want it possible to take 3 days to go through a charge sheet for 15 individuals in one organization. These are some of the things that we're talking about. When will you finish mentioning a case easily takes how long?
Unfortunately, if we look at the field, the legal field and all the actors in it, and what is going on, one is forced to start thinking, okay, God forbid that it should be the case, but one sees the possible collusion. How can this mess just continue unabated? But the truth is, it's not unabated. It is abated. It's just that there's the question of it being reported as regularly as it happens. There's the issue of us understanding what takes place from the time someone is arrested to the time that they actually get jailed, if they can get jailed. There is that. But even that having been said, one has to start thinking, are we being taken for a ride here? And all these people who are in these offices are playing a very big game to keep us happy by trying to tell us that they're actually doing their jobs and they're not. Because options to ensure these things are speeded up exist. Why are they not being speeded up?
Maybe we can look at that. We can look at that a little bit further because I think it has some merit to ask the question: is are we then being taken for a ride by the offices that have been tasked with responsibility to make sure that some of these things actually happen? We're taking a break. It's about 9:45. We'll be back in a bit. Something can be done. And are these folks actually taking us for a ride? Because it can't be the same story over and over again. Well, process. You ask a question and what is thrown at you is process.
We've understood it.
We get it, that it takes some time. But then realizing that it takes so much time to have some of these big cases then brought to book, as it were, then there must be something that you can do about it to change this.
It exists. So the question you're asking goes beyond the judiciary. The normal dance partners, DCI, DPP, judiciary, it goes beyond them. Because for certain things to become law, Parliament has to be involved. And the executive have to be involved because money comes from them. But the authority to expend money, do these things, comes from Parliament. So you have to pause and ask, when they talk about these negotiated settlements, are we seeing other negotiated settlements that are not really in the media? Because one, MPs have also been accused. Members of the executive have been accused. Members of the judiciary have been accused. We've even seen some being dragged to jail. So if it isn't the actual officers or it isn't a collusion of that body or that department, then who in their midst are causing these delays? Because there are things that can be done and they're not being done, and there must be a plausible answer given to the citizens of this country. It can't be that you're spending money for something that doesn't need to take the length of time this one takes. It can't be that it wasn't known that the case against Manduku was what it was. Some of these things, the explanation given may sound plausible, but it is not reasonable. Because it is something you've heard over and over and over and over again with the same results.
Something's got to give at some point whereby, it's going to burst at its seams, because it cannot continue in this way. Now, when we say that the fight against corruption has taken some very positive steps in the last 1.5 years, things have been done where you would never have imagined that they would happen. Some of the high profile arrests that we've seen, charge sheets that we've seen from governors to cabinet secretaries, etc., across board having happened. But then that's where it stops. Then I would at this point say then again, the fight against corruption seems to now be limping. It's not running as fast as it were, as it should have been. And somebody needs to sit up and take notice, because there was the clamor. If we look at the early 2000s going to the mid 2000s, a lot of development partners say, yeah, okay, we're going to help and we're going to hold your hand with this. But this thing, this vice, this corruption thing is something that you're going to have to work on. The argument could be in many cases that, all right, we're going to step up this fight against corruption in order to make sure that we're in good books with our development partners, right? Because that was one of the conditions that came along with this aid or this help or assistance, that, get this fight against corruption, get it on course, and let's see that you're actually doing something. Because a lot of the money that is being drained from your economy is because of the fact that people are corrupt and putting their hands in the cookie jar, in the country's cookie jar, and it should not be. Now, if we're going to help, we need to make sure that you're plugging those holes. Now, unfortunately, it could be seen that here you are fighting corruption to fulfill certain conditions, but you actually don't have the will to get it done, and it's evident then in the things that we see. If it is seen to be serious, the only way that it can be seen to be serious and be seen that we're actually making gains, of course the gains can be seen that we've done so far. We talk about the high profile arrests and such, but making gains whereby you're moving from one place to the next clearly is that if the law is what is stopping you from doing the things that then it can be clear to people that we've made a gain, change that law, amend that law, add something to that law, then that makes it possible for this job that you're doing be seen more clearly. Otherwise, It's just ducks swimming around a pool and you can never see what their legs are doing underwater. That's what we're dealing with here, unfortunately.
When you come from a history where people have been known to trade favors, this isn't a Kenyan thing. It's the world over. Scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. I have this problem, but if you want mine to go away, let your... It cannot possibly be that the two of us sitting in this room are the only ones who are thinking this. I'm sure there are many other Kenyans who have seen this and asked. But more importantly, there are others who actually know what can be done and should be done. And some even know why it isn't being done. We cannot move forward with pronouncements from our so-called external partners telling us we're doing a good job. By which standards? African standards as they perceive them, or their own standards? Because, yes, when a development partner from the West pats you on the back, don't assume that you've suddenly become an equal.
No.
Essentially, you're being told by your thieving African standards,
good boy,
you're doing you're stealing less than the others. Good, yes. And at least people are going to court. This is good. It's not enough. This thing must come to an end. Because the country is on its knees. Our economy is on its knees for this very simple reason. That we've been robbed to the position where we can't stand straight. We have to sort of function from our knees.
On our knees.
And yet we know what's happening. We even know the perpetrators of these things. And you're telling us that we have a judicial process. You have an entire process that seems incapable of doing it, of ensuring that this thing is moved forward. It is not true.
The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. In this case, the spirit is not even willing. And that's what we see here. That because if it was willing, when you want to do something, when you want to be not just be seen, but it is the reality that something is being done, there is nothing that will stop you from getting it done.
You know, when you say the spirit is not willing, it's like saying that, well, the spirit could actually be convinced to be willing. No. Here the spirit is in opposition.
Fighting directly.
Yes, it is opposing it. It's not even willing. And if it's willing, the body will follow suit. It will also be unwilling. Yes. You know, we had there was a case that we had, and we talked about it at great length about the impeachment of the president of the U.S., Donald Trump. And it was interesting to observe the process it followed and the drama that went with it. That the discussion could get to a point where a president is actually being impeached, meaning he's being told, we want to see if you have a case that you could answer. That in itself is a deterrent. We seem to think that there are certain people in the country whom you cannot sort of like impeach. Now, the truth of the matter is that you don't need 10 governors to be impeached. One. That's why I said it is not as though they are not working. There's a bottleneck around the area where they could work as efficiently as they want. And this one, they seem to be just moving around this particular point. If one governor can be impeached, a second one can be impeached, and a third, and so forth. More importantly, they can go to jail. Having said what I have said at great length, generally speaking, if you want to know my honest views, people will go to jail. Forget the impeachment, yes. We're going to see governors going to jail. Despite all these things we keep hearing back and forth. We're going to see ministers going to jail. They will go to jail. We'll see permanent secretaries going to jail, actually going to jail. Despite all these things that we're seeing, they'll go to jail. And why do I say this? That despite this discussion, the vast majority of Kenyans in this country are honest, not just God-fearing, but law-abiding people who actually want the truth and they want honesty. They want their lives to be governed by things that are just and true. But where they fail, where we fail, where I fail, we tend to keep quiet even when things are wrong. We don't raise our voices often enough. So in so doing, we seem to be giving an okay to the wrong.
Well, I think the applause, I think that we have many a Kenyan at that point whereby we say historically something like this has never happened, where you see such high profile arrests. So I think Kenyans have been left in a state of constant applause that, wow, okay, this could actually happen. In my lifetime, I'm seeing something like this where a sitting governor could be arrested, when I'm seeing a sitting CS or whomever in that high position could be arrested. So it's a state of wonderment and wow, acclamation that something like this can actually happen. Before you now get to the next step where you say, all right, so then What happens next? And I think it's the what happens next question that is being asked across board right now and saying, okay, this is great that they've been arrested. They're out on bail or bond on whatever. But then what happens next? And it's that place, at this agitation where the bubbles now are connecting until we get to the boil over, whereby people are saying, okay, you know what? Something else needs to happen. Something more needs to happen at this point. Otherwise, then what was all that? It was fanfare to show us that something was going on. No, we actually need to see that results are coming forth because of this. And I think that if people then are serious about seeing that, we will see in a very short time that people will get a little bit more agitated and something will happen. Until that point, I don't see that any change will be made until the agitation then comes through in a convincing manner.
You are right, but let us say that certain changes, even as the media does a commendable job, and those who are involved in investigative journalism do an excellent job and bring out things that they should bring out. The noise, let me call it the conversation, because I like that word better. The conversation should be more towards solutions, as in set up special courts.
Set up special courts. I mean, been reminded now that, it takes so long because somebody now saying, well, okay, I could steal today a couple millions, a couple billions, and it's going to take 20 years.
Yes.
It's going to take 20 years to convict me, if that. So, I might as well enjoy myself and keep my hands in the proverbial cookie jar for as long as I can. That's the problem. And you don't want to say that it takes so long, because then it gives people fodder to then be able to go further and steal some more. Something definitely needs to be done.
In the 1990s, there was one of the instruments of trading in the New York Stock Exchange, something called junk bonds. People made money from it. Among them was a gentleman by the name of Carl Icahn. That man made a bundle, but he had gone against the rules that are required to be adhered by when trading in this. Insider trading. He had information he shouldn't have used for his benefit, but he did. But what stood out for me about the case of this gentleman is this. He knew what charges would be levied against him. He knew the fines. He set aside the fines. So when the fines came, yes, he paid.
He was ready to pay.
Yes, a few 100 billion shillings, he paid. And whatever else was required, he paid. But he was still jailed.
He was still jailed at the end of the day.
He was still jailed.
And speaking at the end of the day, unpackage today's proverb for us, CT.
Well, what it simply means is this, If you have unrealistic expectations, one, they will not be realized, and two, you'll be disappointed. And if your expectations are huge, then your disappointments will be equally huge. A monkey believes that his bushy eyelashes cost him his beauty. He doesn't think of his height. He doesn't think of his ears. He doesn't think of his nose. He doesn't think of his arms. He focuses on his eyebrows. His entire body is bushy, but he focuses on the eyebrows.
The eyebrows.
If you have unrealistic expectations to solutions, you will not realize them and you will be disappointed. If they are greater, you'll be greatly disappointed. Yes. And if you have unrealistic explanations for situations that are real, then your disappointment will be profound, because what we've been discussing the whole day is looking at things in the way that we look at them, and we've been trying to focus on what they really are.
What the real thing is.
The real thing is not your bushy eyebrow. No, that's not the explanation. The real thing is that you may actually be beautiful. It's you who thinks that you're not beautiful.
Wow. How's that for unpackaging it? This has been Kenya's biggest conversation in the Situation Room today, CT. Until we meet again tomorrow, say goodbye.
The discussion continues.
The discussion continues. Thank you very much for keeping it here with us. Right after we close it out at the top of the hour, Spice Soul until 3 o'clock. And then Monique will take you home on the drive until 7 and open it up for the adults in the room to come in and talk about everything, relationships and issues having to do with the heart from 7 to 10. From now, enjoy Spice Soul until we meet again in the morning tomorrow. Kenya's biggest conversation. My name is Nduoko and I've been here with CT Muga. The conversation definitely does continue about things that we see important, or definitely looking at the underbelly of issues. We keep talking, we keep digging, we keep checking it out.